perimenopausal athletes and beyond masterclass series, bringing experts from all over. And here we are. I just would like to welcome you, Carolyn, to the series and to share your expertise.
And I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, I'm thrilled that you are. And let me tell everybody a little bit about you and what you're doing. So essentially, you're a movement educator and a wellness coach, and you've created a practice, a different type of practice. It's called Yogility.
Yep,
I love that.
Right.
Yogility. Yeah. It's so beautiful. Yeah. And it's a healthy aging movement practice, and really thinking about mobility and strength and stability and agility.
Correct.
And we're going to get into that. But just before we came on, one of the things that I think is fascinating is the people who you serve. So you mentioned that you serve people who don't move enough.
Yep.
And then you are serving people who have moved too much.
Yeah, exactly.
And can you share just a little bit more about your thinking on that push and that pull of the two, and how that comes in and relates into your practice?
Sure. So for me, I relate much more to the person who moves too much. I call myself a lifelong mover. I've been active for pretty much my whole life. And somewhere around my mid 50s, I would say, I was still going at it at the same rate and pace as I was in my 30s. Like I just, doing all kinds of really fun and interesting, exciting things, but my body wasn't loving so much what I was doing anymore, but I wasn't paying attention to the signals. Mm-hmm. And so I started to experience some pain, like things like I had one ankle that was hurting me for a whole year, another ankle that hurt me for another year, like different things that were happening, and not really paying as close attention to what the body signals were offering to me. And eventually, which we'll probably speak about a little later, I ended up having, like, the universe basically smashed me over the head when I broke my wrist, and I went into complete slowdown and was able to recognize that maybe I was just doing too much, that there's a stage in our lives where we have to consider that these joints and these body parts really need to sustain us for the rest of our lives. So I work with clients sometimes who will tell me, like my knees are shot, or they have bunions happening, so they're not walking properly, or they hike all the time, but their feet are a total mess, or they love to do vinyasa yoga, but they've ruined their shoulders. So these people are people that they're just enthusiastic, athletic individuals who have maybe taken it a step too far. Mm-hmm. But then I also work with clients who just are super busy. They're working, they're sitting at a desk all day long. They probably, for the most part, want to be more active. They recognize that their body is equally falling apart, but for different reasons, because they've spent too much sitting. They're not active enough. They've got too much stress in their life, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So, I feel like there's a middle point where we have to acknowledge that our bodies, we absolutely need to move. I think it is, it's essential, at any time, but particularly as we get older. Yeah. But we also have to recognize that there's got to be time to restore and to find movement that is more nutritious as opposed to more active, and sort of slow down on the active sometimes and give the body some of the other movements that it requires.
Yeah. And what I was so drawn to your story, and I do want to hear about it, and the wrist, is this idea of, or what you came to within your practice of noticing the small stuff. That's how I call it. It's like Carolyn notices the small stuff, and how, as we are, go through perimenopause, and I think, you talk about the aging, but I think, we need to prepare for it. Like what you do is as relevant to those that are in the 35, and understanding, these little bits, these little fingers and wrists and all the small motor movements are as important as the big ones that we focus in on our sport. right?
Right.
So let's hear about your story, about what happened and, your practice before, and then how it's come and translated into the agility and the strength and the mobility and what you've learned.
Okay. Thank you. So, I really pride myself of having always been strong, fit, and to some degree I've identified in that way. That was sort of that's been my identity. I'm the health and wellness person, and really, and I'm sure many people listening to this summit would say that that's their identity.
Yeah.
And with great pride. I've really enjoyed a very active life. And this is so personal, because I'm really sharing my own journey somewhere. As I became a yoga teacher in my early 40s, and it became the passionate love of my life. I was teaching and practicing like crazy. I was an Ashtanga yoga teacher, which is a very intense practice, and was teaching a lot and exercise and practicing a lot. But there were so many little things happening in my body. I was feeling like my hip would start to hurt, or as I mentioned before, I was having ankle issues, and different things were happening in my body. And I was just kind of going along because I honestly didn't really know better. And then somewhere around my mid 50s, I started to think, okay, something's wrong here. Like I'm exercising so much, I'm moving my body so often, I'm eating really well, not sleeping so great, but that's another story. What's happening here? And so I started to do some research. And essentially what I discovered is that there were so many things that I was not addressing. I wasn't taking care of the small, like you just mentioned, like the wrists and the fingers and the ankles and the toes. I was focusing on the big picture, long distance running, long distance cycling, very into hiking. I wasn't really doing any weight training during many years of my yoga teaching and practicing. And so I started to learn a lot about things that I had never known anything about, like mobility training and focusing more on like strength at the heart of the joint, like, finding ways to mobilize a hip joint or a shoulder joint, but from a place of strength, as opposed to a place of, like, I mean, my flexibility was awesome, but it was too awesome. Like I was too flexible. Like that's what was happening, right? Like I was so into the flexibility, I didn't realize that I was like really becoming lax in my joints through my ligaments, which is unfortunately a fact that begins to happen as we get older. You're pulling and pulling and pulling. Eventually, laxity starts to happen in the joints. So, in my research, I discovered ways to bring more integrity into the joints and find ways to keep my body really fluid. I guess fluidity became really the focus of my attention, because I started to realize, like, if you see people as they become aged and older, everything starts to stiffen up because the joints don't have the mobility. So that sort of became a little obsessed, I guess I would say, with trying to figure out ways to keep this body going so that I could continue to love and enjoy all the things I love to do, but without the pain, because I was experiencing a lot of pain. So that's what.
Can I just ask you, what, when you say I was experiencing pain, just so people can place that, what did that feel like to you, that pain?
Okay, well, my hips were constantly stiff. So I would have stiff, tight hips. So I would stretch them. And then I would stretch them, and then my tight hips would be tight. And it was a circular. And my shoulders, I injured my left shoulder, then I injured my right shoulder, then I had both shoulders. I couldn't bring my arms out to the sides because I could barely lift my arms over my head. So I started to realize that there were many ways that I was not moving my body.
Right.
And this is what I think may be a factor with very athletic people who are super athletic, is we become very focused on what we love, and we do a lot of what we love a lot. Right. And I know that you're an endurance athlete. I've never been an endurance athlete. My athletic pursuits have always been within, I guess, a range. I've not like really worked in races and things like that, but I've done a lot of activity all the time. I always thought more was better. But then I realized that so as I began to experience this hip pain and shoulder pain, and even some I didn't have so much low back pain. The low back pain came a bit later. But I was experiencing, as I mentioned, I had one ankle that was really bothering me for a year. Then I had another ankle that was bothering me for a year. And so I did go to osteopaths and physios and chiropractors and doctors and everybody. No one really had much of an answer for me. It was sort of through my own research that I came to realize I'm missing a big part of the fitness pie, that there's many parts of this, of many components that really make up a holistic movement practice, and that I needed to start to take it down a notch from all the heavy, big stuff and start to refine a little bit and focus on the things so that we can, so that I would be able to take whatever I'm doing and transfer it into my life. So that the things that I was doing were more appropriate for being able to take them outside of the gym or outside of off my mat and take them with me into the world, whatever that might be, whether it's hiking, whether it's playing golf, whether it's, whatever it's cycling, the things that I love to do. You need to have mobile joints for most of the activities. And so that's where I moved to when I developed the Yogility practice. I don't know if you want to go to that yet, if you want to.
Yeah, keep going.
That. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the Yogility practice really came about as I started to learn all of these different ways of moving. It eventually evolved into what I realized was, because as I was creating it, I was aging. I was approaching my 60s. And I started to learn more about what that means. I honestly, when I was 50, I never thought about being 60. It never even occurred to me. I was 50 and that's where I was.
Yeah.
But suddenly 50 became 55 and 55 became 56, 7, 8, 9, and so on. And I started to realize, holy, I need to keep these joints strong and healthy and mobile and functioning for when I'm 70 and when I'm 80. It's suddenly 60, what I see in my front view is a little bit shorter than what I have in my rear view. And so I'm recognizing that I need to start to pay attention to where I'm headed. And being a very athletic person who identifies very strongly on my health and my strength, it is so important that I maintain this. And that's where the motivation to create a practice that would offer sustainability for the client who doesn't move that much. This will give them a gentler practice that they can, keep their body moving in a good way. And then the more athletic people, the ones who are more focused on their trade, whatever that might be, could give them some nutritious movement that would fill in some of the gaps that they may not be focusing on. So when I create classes, I'm thinking always what nutritious movement would be of value for this body of mine and for anybody's body. So, falling becomes such a scary and almost inevitable sometimes reality for people. So there are many factors that are important to consider when you think about falling. Having balance, having agility, having the capacity to have that resilience and that rebound should you fall is really is critical and can really save you. So I'm not suggesting that a 35-year-old athlete should be worrying about falling the way a 90-year-old person would, because it's not going to be the same. Their hips are more mobile, but there are, your athlete who is on a bike and has a fall and puts their hand out to prevent their fall still has the vulnerability in their wrist if they haven't trained their wrists to be moving in a variety of different directions. So that's it's the small subtle things that I'll focus on. So I'll do loading up the wrists, but we'll move the wrists in all different directions, or I'll load up the ankles, and we move them in all different directions, or even mobilizing the toes. Sometimes it's, it could be semi-boring things, but I was working with a client yesterday whose knee's bothering her. She's been told that she might, that it may be her meniscus and she may need a surgery. we did some rolling on the sole of her foot, stretched her toes, and suddenly, and her hamstrings were super tight. Suddenly her hamstring wasn't as tight anymore. So it's sort of like almost like backing things up a little bit to really think, we have a whole body to contend with, and they're all, and especially through fascia, everything is so connected. So we really want to be able to think about all the possible ways to enhance every aspect of the body so that it's all healthy and it's all functioning well, so that, if the wrists and the ankles and the knees are functioning well, that makes whatever athletic pursuit you're doing, if you're a runner or a cyclist or whatever, it's going to be of great value.
Mm-hmm. So, as we come into this conversation for athletes, and we think about our year ahead, and we think about what sort of things we need to do, this particularly for female athletes at any point, obviously, but you're speaking directly also to those that are, closer to the and beyond part. So we're in, at the late stages of perimenopause, you're really starting to realize, okay, I have this soreness in my joints, or it's just more creaky, achy, painful, however that shows up. There's ways in which we need to kind of laser focus in onto the small stuff so that we can bring out the longevity in a different way.
Right.
But it takes time. And it takes a really deliberate practice. And I think that that's what's so interesting about what you are bringing forward, is that time and the practice and the awareness of all the different things that we can do. So tell us, I'm interested, you mentioned that you love hiking, and I love, my athletes get a lot of or hike, because I love hiking too. I'm such a big hiker. And I think of hiking as, the ability to be, on really, unstable terrain. Right. And you're doing lunges, and your foot isn't always placed on, on the road when we think about running, and as either an ultra, run or marathon or triathlon, there's on road, it's so static. It doesn't provide us. Now, tell me the difference between a situation of hiking and getting that different movement, and then what your practice is, and again, becoming in almost a laboratory setting, bringing more awareness to it, so that if we are doing these things and we fall, we have that strength and stability to help our bodies fall well, if I can say that. Yeah.
So, let's use hiking as an example.
Yeah.
With hiking, your ankles are really going into some intense dorsiflexion. Mm-hmm. And many people come off of a hike, and their feet hurt. Yeah. And their ankles hurt, and their knees hurt, because they have been introducing their lower limbs into positioning, like you just described, on surfaces that are imbalanced. So the ankle is a little bit tilted one way or tilted the other way. You're moving forward into dorsiflexion. You might be going into plantar flexion, like your feet are moving, your ankles are moving, your knees are moving, not always necessarily in a healthy way. So what I would address is, let's prepare the ankle, the toes, the Achilles tendons, the calves, the knees, the quads, all of those muscles. Let's prepare them for taking them from the gentle movement that we're going to do on the mat, so that those muscles are prepared and ready and ripe for the challenge of being on you're out in BC, where the hiking is incredibly awesome. It's like my favorite place in the world to hike. So that, and I've been on some very intense hikes in that area, and it could be pretty hard. So sometimes it's a scramble. You're actually on your knees almost. But if your body is not physically trained for that type of terrain, you can, I'm not going to say that you're going to get injured, but you might experience a lot of discomfort, because you're going to suffer you're going to suffer more because your joints haven't been prepared for that. And I would say that that's going to be even more so as people get older. So I have a number of clients who are major hikers, but they're not focusing on things like balance and stability. So their body is incredibly trained for the hike. Their legs do it because they do it every single day. But all the other stuff, because of those ankles that are constantly moving in this direction, have them stand on one foot, for example, and use their glute muscle to help them stay stable. They don't have that strength because that's not where they have focused their attention. So I guess I'm always trying to think a little bit ahead and say, it's not one thing.
Right.
It's not one thing. And I think when we had a previous conversation, I mentioned to you, like, while kale and blueberries are awesome foods and they are nutritious and everybody will tell you they're filled with antioxidants and they're great for you,
Yeah.
but they're not enough. They're not enough. They don't create a holistic, full, healthy meal. We need to supplement with all, with the healthy fats and the proteins and stuff. And I guess that's my philosophy when it comes to movement. So, there are things like cardio and strength training and flexibility and stuff. Those are all like the basics that most of us are aware of. I'm trying to kind of like, if we go for, if this is cardio and this is our flexibility, I want to be somewhere in the middle here, where I'm challenging some of the things that just don't show up in a typical exercise regimen, because they're not the focus of attention. The focus is usually on, and it depends on the age. I mean, that's the other thing that is important to mention. Like when I was in my 20s and I was teaching aerobics, my abs were the key thing that I was focused on, right? Like I wanted to look great in my bathing suit. Yeah. And then when I was having kids in my 30s, well, what was important there was that I wanted to like have energy to like be a full-time working mom. And in my 40s, it became, something different. And every decade, it kind of changes, I think, because we change and our needs change. So my objective is to get people thinking about their longevity earlier. And I think I may not have experienced what I experienced when I had my fall. So if I'll just say this now. So I was actually had literally just turned 60. That was 2 years ago. And a month later was running to catch a green light, which is so typical of my story, because I was rushing to get to where I needed to go. And because I couldn't bear to wait for that red light to turn green. I had to go run for it. And I tripped and I fell and I put my hand out and I broke my wrist. Now, a break of a wrist doesn't seem like such a traumatic thing to happen, except that trauma shut my entire body down. I literally developed some type of something in every joint in my body. My knees stiffened up, my wrists, my ankles, my spine, everything started like, I didn't have inflammation markers, but I couldn't move my body. And it took many months to recover from that. And I feel like this was my body reaching the end of its capacity to handle so much intensity. And so I've really been focusing for the last couple of years on, like, I was already teaching the Yogility practice, but I was also doing a lot of other stuff along with it. It's been the last couple of years where I've really come to realize I'm in my 60s now, and it's time to just be really conscious of making sure that everything, because I never thought I was going to come back to having my healthy body back, but I thankfully did. And now I'm just like sharing this message with everybody to say, take care of yourself. Just make sure that you are doing all the things that you can do to take care of all your body parts, because they all count. They all matter. It's like we really can't neglect one and focus on the other, because it'll come back to haunt you at some point, I think.
Yeah, I really love your message. And I think it's really important coming to it exactly where you are at in life, because my sphere of, like I look at and I follow coaches and I follow lots of different things that I follow, and we don't talk about this. And we don't have a lot of examples of people in the profession that are really honing in on the beyond. and how you said a word, and it's just so perfect, the longevity. And if there's one thing I know, it's that the listeners and, to this masterclass series want to keep going.
Yeah.
And, another, something that also resonated is, I'll just bring her up. My mom, she did, she's 69, and she just did a 3-day hike, a backpacking trip with my sister and her family, and loved it. Everything was awesome. And I know that when she's 70 and then 71, 72, she's going to want to keep going, but she won't. We all won't if it becomes too much of a sufferfest after. Right? Like, sure, anybody can go out and do it. Not anybody. Okay. That's totally not true. But there's a lot of people that can go out and do it for that moment. Go out, do your 5K, your body will handle it. But will you do it again? Will you have the longevity in sport? Will you be able to keep appreciating and loving what it is that, being out there in the environment, however that looks for you? And you're bringing in a practice that will allow that keeps us attuned to it.
Yeah. And I think it's the other message that I think is really important to hone in on is that wherever people are, like if you're in your 30s, you're focusing on what's important for you at this moment. Likely when you enter your 40s, your priorities will probably change a little bit because your life will change, because our bodies change. And so on into 50s and into 60s and so on. And for those of us who are, who identify as athletes and athletic people, like I know for myself, I'm going to be doing those 3-day hikes until until you have to just like tie me down,
Yeah.
But I also have to acknowledge that whether I like it or not, it's almost like as you get older, unfortunately, it's almost like going uphill in sand, because things are starting to deteriorate, whether you like it or not. Posturally, our spine begins to change, and our joints become stiffer, and our muscles mass starts to deteriorate, and so do our bones. And this is just, unfortunately, like, now we can hold them to a certain degree, but if we're not addressing it, if we're like, turning our face away and saying like, that's never going to be, yes, which I was, but you know what? I was ignorantly, I didn't know better. So now I know better. And that's sort of my message is like, please acknowledge that these bodies, like it or not, they do begin to change. And I'm like the living example of it. And I just posted something on Instagram the other day, getting up and down off the floor, just being able to be very fluid with moving my joints in a way that I can get up and down without using my hands. Seems such a simple task. And at 30, it probably is. But you know what? At 60, it's not as easy. There are so many coordinating components that go into it. Well, I want to be able to do that when I'm 90, So that's kind of my message.
Oh, Carolyn, I absolutely love it. And I know how important it is. So I'm so glad that I have come into our orbits, have come together. So you have, this is incredibly generous. And if anybody that is listening to this and comes into wanting to know more, Carolyn is offering a 75-minute coaching session, movement or wellness with you. And so you can learn more about these, about nutritious movements. It's so perfectly beautiful in how we think about how are we nourishing our whole body, and these small things, and which will add to our big things that we want to do in life. So thank you for that incredible generosity to this masterclass. It's absolutely beautiful.
My pleasure.
And with that, I'm going to ask you 3 quick rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. Give us one moment of courage.
Well, the moment of courage is really where I'm at right now, is celebrating being willing to share my message and being okay with sharing that I'm 62 years old in a few weeks or in about a month. That's courage, because I know a lot of us like to not be talking about our age. So I feel it's courageous to be out there sharing my story at this stage of life.
Oh, and it's so important because of your experience and because we need more of you. We need way more of you and people that like you that can bring it out to others, right?
Thank you.
What is one thing that you are curious about right now?
Well, I'm actually, to be honest, I'm curious in a scared sort of way to see how I can continue to um, like walk my talk,
Yeah.
basically, right? Because I'm in the trenches here. So my curiosity is, I've never been 62 before. It'll be my first time being all of these ages. So my curiosity is taking my athletic prowess and taking it into these next decades.
Yeah, very. I hope that, I know I'll be following you and wanting to continue the conversation. So very interesting. And what you learn, I hope, and I'm glad that you have the courage to share it. So that's so perfect. And what is one thing you're grateful for right now?
I'm really grateful to have my body having come back to its full, complete health, because I didn't know if it ever was going to. So very grateful to be able to, as I say, walk the talk from a place of authenticity.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with our listeners that, that we haven't touched on?
Well, I guess the only thing that I would, sort of wrap up it to say is, and I'm sure most people have probably heard this expression about movement being, if movement could be put into a pill, it would be the most administered medication on the planet. And I think that, all of us keep moving and enjoying the joy of movement is critical. So like, I'm preaching to the choir here, but just to understand and to recognize that along with all that active movement is to also make sure that you're taking care of yourself, practicing self-compassion, taking time to be kind and gentle to your body, because we only get one chance.
What a perfect thing to end on. So thank you, Carolyn, for joining us and sharing what you're up to. It's beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Take care.